The wind howled across the barren mountainside as Donna Taylor pressed her three daughters closer against the rocky outcropping, their thin shawls no match for the bitter cold that cut through the October night. The youngest, barely 8 years old, whimpered softly while her sisters, 12 and 14, tried to shield her with their own trembling bodies. Donna's heart hammered against her ribs as she heard the voices growing closer. The men who had been hunting them for 3 days now, ever since they had fled the settlement, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the terrible knowledge that nowhere would be safe for them anymore. "Mama," whispered her middle daughter, "I can't feel my feet." Donna pulled her closer, her own feet numb in the worn boots that had already begun to split at the seams. 3 weeks ago, she had been the wife of a respected merchant in the valley town of Cedar Ridge, mother to three healthy daughters, secure in the belief that hard work and righteousness would see them through any trial. Now she was a widow, branded with accusations that had turned their neighbors into a mob, forced to flee into the unforgiving wilderness with winter approaching and no hope of shelter. The sound of boots on stone made her blood freeze. They were close now, too close. She could hear their rough voices carrying on the wind, speaking of rewards and justice, words that had lost all meaning when applied to her family. Her husband Mark had died trying to protect a traveling family from bandits. But somehow the story had twisted in the telling, and now she and her daughters were the ones being hunted as criminals. "There," came a gruff voice from somewhere above them. "I see tracks heading down toward that ledge." Donna's breath caught in her throat. In moments they would be discovered. She looked at her daughters, their faces pale and exhausted in the moonlight, and felt something break inside her chest. They had done nothing wrong, yet here they were, hunted like animals, about to be dragged back to face a justice that had already decided their fate. The footsteps grew closer. Donna closed her eyes and pulled her daughters tight, whispering a prayer into the cold mountain air. When she opened them again, a tall figure stood silhouetted against the stars at the edge of their hiding place, and she knew their flight was over. But the man who stepped into view was not one of their pursuers. He was massive, broad-shouldered and bearded, dressed in rough mountain clothing that spoke of years spent in the wilderness. His eyes, when they met hers, held no malice, only a careful assessment that seemed to take in everything about their situation in a single glance. "You the woman they're hunting?" His voice was low, barely above a whisper. Donna nodded, unable to speak past the fear that had closed her throat. The stranger looked at her daughters, then back at her. "How many men?" "6," she managed to whisper back. "Maybe 7." He nodded once, then moved to the edge of the outcropping and listened for a moment to the voices that were now uncomfortably close. When he turned back to them, his expression had hardened. "Can you walk?" "We can try." "Then follow me. Stay quiet. Step where I step. And don't look back no matter what you hear. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments." The stranger moved like a shadow despite his size, leading them along a narrow path that seemed to exist only in his mind. Donna followed with her daughters, their hands clasped together in a chain that she prayed would not be broken. Behind them, the voices of their pursuers grew more agitated as they discovered the empty hiding place. "They were here," someone called out. "Tracks lead this way." The stranger paused and held up a hand. "I'm a Kopanish," then pointed to a crevice in the rock face that looked too narrow for human passage. But as they approached, Donna saw that it opened into a hidden passage that led deeper into the mountain. One by one they squeezed through the opening, the stranger bringing up the rear and somehow managing to fit his large frame through the narrow space. The passage opened into a small cave, and the stranger struck a match to light a stub of candle that revealed a space that had clearly been used before. There were blankets stacked against one wall, supplies stored in wooden crates, and the remains of old fires in a circle of stones near the entrance. "Safe house," the stranger said simply. "Used it before when the weather turns bad." Donna sank to the floor of the cave, her legs finally giving out as the adrenaline that had carried her this far began to ebb. Her daughters huddled around her, and she wrapped her arms around them, feeling their small bodies shaking with exhaustion and fear. "Thank you," she whispered to the stranger, who was already moving to block the cave entrance with stones and brush that had been placed there for that purpose. "I don't know why you helped us, but thank you." He paused in his work and looked at her over his shoulder. Name's Jonathan Rodriguez. Been watching those men track you for 2 days now. Don't much care for their methods. They think we're criminals, Donna said, the words bitter in her mouth. They think we killed my husband and stole money from the town. Jonathan finished blocking the entrance and turned to face them fully. In the candlelight, she could see that he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 40, with intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Did you? The question was asked without judgment, and somehow that made it easier to answer. My husband died defending a family from road agents. I buried him with my own hands. 3 days later, the sheriff came to our house with a warrant, saying someone had accused us of being in league with the bandits, of setting up the attack. They said we had gold hidden somewhere, that Mark had been working with the criminals all along. She felt her eldest daughter, Angela, press closer against her side. They searched our house, tore it apart looking for money that didn't exist. When they didn't find anything, they decided we must have hidden it somewhere else. The sheriff said they'd hold us until we confessed. So you ran. What choice did I have? My husband was dead, our reputation destroyed. I have 3 daughters to protect, and no one in that town was going to help us. Jonathan nodded slowly, then moved to one of the supply crates and pulled out strips of dried meat and a water skin. He handed them to Donna without comment. Eat, rest. We'll talk more in the morning. As her daughters fell upon the food with the desperation of the truly hungry, Donna studied their rescuer. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years in the wilderness. But there was something else about him, a gentleness in the way he looked at her daughters that spoke of understanding and compassion. Why are you helping us? She asked quietly. Jonathan was spreading blankets near the back of the cave, creating a sleeping area that would be warm and sheltered. Maybe because I know what it's like to be hunted for something you didn't do. Maybe because I don't like seeing children suffer for adult failures. There was pain in his voice, old and carefully controlled, and Donna sensed there was a story there that he wasn't ready to tell. But she didn't press. This man had saved their lives, and that was enough for now. The night passed slowly. Outside their hidden refuge, Donna could occasionally hear the voices of their pursuers, searching and calling to each other across the rocky slopes. But the sounds gradually faded as the men moved their search to other areas, and by dawn the mountain was quiet except for the wind. Jonathan had slept sitting up near the cave entrance, his rifle across his knees, and Donna realized he had spent the entire night on guard while she and her daughters rested. When she stirred in the early morning light that filtered through gaps in their makeshift barrier, he was already awake, listening intently to the sounds from outside. They've moved on, he said quietly. For now. Donna sat up carefully, trying not to wake her daughters, who were still sleeping deeply for the first time in days. Will they come back? Probably. Men like that don't give up easy, especially when there's a reward involved. The word hit her like a physical blow. A reward? Jonathan's expression was grim. $500 for your capture, dead or alive. Donna felt the blood drain from her face. $500 was more money than most people in the territory saw in a year. With that kind of bounty on their heads, they would never be safe anywhere there were people. Who posted it? Sheriff says it came from the territorial governor's office. Someone with influence wants you found. Donna closed her eyes, trying to think. Who would have that kind of power, that kind of money? Her husband had been an honest merchant, dealing in supplies and equipment for the mining camps. They had lived modestly, saved what they could, but they had no enemies that she knew of. Then a memory surfaced, something Mark had mentioned in the weeks before his death. A man had come to their store, well-dressed and speaking with an Eastern accent, asking questions about the routes the supply wagons took, the schedules they kept. Mark had been suspicious, had refused to provide the information, but the man had been persistent. There was someone, she said slowly. A stranger who came to our store a few weeks before Mark died. He wanted to know about the freight routes, when the shipments went out, which roads we used. Jonathan's attention sharpened. What did he look like? Tall, thin, well-dressed, had a scar on his left hand here. She touched the back of her own hand. Mark didn't trust him, wouldn't tell him what he wanted to know. And then your husband was killed defending a family from road agents. The implication hit her like a thunderbolt. You think this man was connected to the attack? I think your husband might have stumbled onto something bigger than a simple robbery. And I think someone wants to make sure you and your daughters can't tell anyone about it. Donna felt sick. If Jonathan was right, then they weren't just running from false accusations. They were running from people who had already killed once and wouldn't hesitate to kill again. Her youngest daughter, Nancy, stirred and opened her eyes. Mama, are we safe now? Donna smoothed the child's hair, forcing a smile she didn't feel. We're safe for now, sweetheart. But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't true. They would never be safe as long as whoever was behind this wanted them dead. Jonathan seemed to read her thoughts. There's a place, he said quietly, high up in the mountains, where the snow doesn't melt even in summer. It's hard to reach, harder to find, but it's defensible. You could wait there while I go back down and do some investigating. You do that for us? Why? Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, staring at the cave entrance as if seeing something beyond it. I told you I knew what it was like to be hunted. 5 years ago, I was a deputy sheriff down in Silver Creek. There was corruption in the department, money changing hands, criminals being protected. When I tried to expose it, they framed me for murder. He turned to look at her, and she saw the old pain in his eyes. I had a wife then, a daughter. They killed them both and made it look like I did it. I've been running ever since, living up here in the mountains, trying to stay ahead of the bounty hunters. Donna's heart clenched with sympathy. I'm so sorry. The point is, I know what it's like to lose everything because of other people's greed. I know what it's like to watch your family suffer for crimes you didn't commit. I won't let that happen to you and your girls if I can help it. Angela, her eldest, had awakened during this conversation and was listening with the solemn attention of someone forced to grow up too quickly. Mama, if we go with him, will we ever be able to come home? It was the question Donna had been dreading, because she didn't have an answer. Home was gone, probably forever. Their house would have been seized, their belongings sold or destroyed. Even if they could somehow clear their names, there would be nothing left to return to. I don't know, sweetheart, she said honestly, but we'll be together and we'll be alive. That's what matters now. Jonathan began packing supplies into a canvas bag. If we're going to move, we need to do it now while those men are searching the lower slopes. The trail to the high country is treacherous, but it's our best chance. Donna looked at her 3 daughters, seeing her own fear reflected in their young faces. Nancy was only 8, barely old enough to understand what was happening to them. Janet, her middle child, was 12 and trying to be brave, but Donna could see the tremor in her hands. Angela, at 14, was the closest to being a woman, but she was still a child who should have been worried about lessons and friends, not survival and death. Can they make the climb? She asked Jonathan quietly. He studied her daughters with the same careful assessment he had given their situation the night before. They're stronger than they look. Mountain living teaches you that people can do more than they think they can when they have to. What about supplies, food, warm clothes? There's a cabin up there, stocked for emergencies. It's not much, but it'll keep you alive through the winter if necessary. The winter. Donna hadn't thought that far ahead, had been focused only on getting through each day. But now she realized they might be facing months in the wilderness. Months of cold and isolation and constant danger. And you'll really go back down to investigate? Jonathan nodded. Someone orchestrated this whole thing, from your husband's murder to the bounty on your heads. If I can find proof, maybe we can clear your names and get your lives back. It was more hope than Donna had dared to allow herself since this nightmare began. She looked at her daughters again, seeing not just fear now, but also a glimmer of determination. They were her children, and they had inherited her stubbornness along with her compassion. All right, she said finally, we'll go with you. The climb began in the pre-dawn darkness, with Jonathan leading them along paths that seemed to exist more in memory than reality. The mountain face was steep and treacherous, with loose rock that shifted underfoot and drops that disappeared into shadow. Donna kept her daughters between herself and Jonathan, one hand always reaching for the next handhold, the other ready to catch whichever child might stumble. Nancy struggled the most, her short legs unable to match the pace that Jonathan set, but she never complained. When she fell behind, Janet would take her hand and help her along, and when Janet grew tired, Angela would take her turn. They moved like a unit, each supporting the others, and Donna felt a fierce pride in their resilience. The sun rose as they climbed, painting the peaks around them in shades of gold and pink that would have been beautiful under other circumstances. But Donna had no attention to spare for scenery. Every step took them higher, farther from the men who hunted them, but also deeper into a wilderness that could kill them just as surely as any bounty hunter. How much farther? Angela asked during one of their brief rests. Jonathan pointed to a ridge that seemed impossibly high above them. That's the first marker. We'll rest there for a bit, then continue to the cabin. Nancy looked up at the distant ridge with dismay. I don't think I can make it that far. Yes, you can, Donna said firmly. We all can. We're stronger than we know. It was something Mark used to say, back when their biggest worry was whether the store would turn a profit that month. He had believed in the strength of the human spirit, in the ability of ordinary people to rise to extraordinary challenges. Donna had thought it was just one of his sayings, but now she understood that he had been preparing her for this moment without even knowing it. They climbed for hours, stopping only when the younger girls needed rest or water. The path grew narrower and more dangerous as they ascended, with sections where they had to edge along ledges barely wide enough for their feet. Jonathan went first, testing each step, then helped each of them across the treacherous spots. Don't look down, he told Nancy during one particularly frightening traverse. Look at me, focus on my voice, and just put one foot in front of the other. The child obeyed, her face pale but determined, and made it safely across. Donna followed, her heart in her throat, then Janet and Angela. Each successful crossing built their confidence, and by midday, they were moving with more assurance despite their exhaustion. When they finally reached the ridge Jonathan had pointed out, Donna collapsed onto a flat rock and tried to catch her breath. The view from this height was spectacular, with the valley spread out far below them like a green carpet dotted with the silver threads of streams. She could see the town they had fled from, looking tiny and harmless from this distance. Are they still following us? She asked Jonathan, who was studying the slopes below through a small telescope. I see dust clouds on the lower trails. Could be them, could be other travelers. Either way, we need to keep moving. They shared water and dried meat, rationing carefully since they didn't know how long their supplies would need to last. The girls were tired but holding up well, and Donna felt a surge of maternal pride at their courage. Mama, Janet said quietly, what if we can't ever go back? What if we have to live up here forever? It was the question that had been haunting Donna's thoughts all morning. Then we'll make a life here, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. People have lived in these mountains before. We'll learn what we need to know. But what about school and friends and church on Sundays? Donna looked at her middle daughter's earnest face and felt her heart break a little. These were the normal concerns of a 12-year-old girl, the things that should matter in her world. Instead, Janet was facing a future of exile and hardship, and there was nothing Donna could do to change that. We'll figure it out, she said finally. We'll find ways to keep learning, to stay connected to the things that matter, and we'll have each other. That's the most important thing. Jonathan had finished his surveillance and was packing the telescope away. Time to move. The cabin's still 3 hours away, and I want to reach it before dark. The afternoon climb was even more challenging than the morning had been. The air grew thinner as they ascended, making every breath an effort, and the temperature dropped noticeably despite the bright sunshine. Donna found herself checking constantly on her daughters, watching for signs of altitude sickness or exhaustion. But the girls continued to surprise her with their endurance. Nancy, the youngest, had found a rhythm that worked for her, taking smaller steps but maintaining a steady pace. Janet had appointed herself the group's navigator, carefully watching where Jonathan placed his feet and calling out warnings about loose rocks or difficult passages. Angela had taken on the role of rear guard, making sure no one fell behind and encouraging the others when the going got particularly tough. As the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, casting long shadows across the mountainside, Jonathan finally called a halt at what appeared to be nothing more than a jumble of rocks and scraggly pine trees. This is it, he announced. Donna looked around in confusion. Where? Jonathan smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. Watch and learn. He moved to what looked like a solid rock face and began removing stones that had been carefully placed to camouflage an opening. Within minutes, he had revealed the entrance to a cave that extended back into the mountain. Natural cave, improved over the years by various folks who needed a place to weather storms or hide from trouble. Come on. The cave entrance opened into a surprisingly spacious chamber, and as Jonathan lit an oil lamp, Donna gasped at what the light revealed. This wasn't just a cave, it was a fully equipped mountain refuge. There were bunk beds built into alcoves along the walls, a stone fireplace with a chimney that had been carved through the rock ceiling, shelves lined with canned goods and supplies, and even a small table with chairs. Who built all this? Angela asked, her voice filled with wonder. Different people over the years. Miners, trappers, folks like us who needed a place to disappear for a while. Everyone who uses it leaves something behind and takes only what they need. It's an unwritten law up here. Nancy ran to one of the bunk beds and bounced on the mattress, which was stuffed with pine needles and surprisingly comfortable. Can I sleep here? You can sleep wherever you want, Donna said, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders for the first time in days. They were safe, at least for now. They had shelter, supplies, and a defender who clearly knew these mountains better than their pursuers ever could. Jonathan was already building a fire in the fireplace, and soon the cave was filled with warmth and the comforting smell of burning wood. He opened cans of beans and peaches, and they ate their first hot meal since fleeing their home. How long can we stay here? Donna asked as her daughters explored their new surroundings. As long as you need to. Winter's coming, which means the high passes will be closed soon. Nobody's going to follow you up here once the snow starts. And you'll really go back down to investigate? Jonathan nodded. I'll leave in a few days once you're settled, and I'm sure those men have given up the search. I'll head to Silver Creek first, see what I can learn about that stranger who visited your store. Then I'll work my way back toward your town, asking questions, following leads. It could be dangerous. Everything's dangerous now, but you can't live your whole life running. Eventually, you have to make a stand. 3 days later, Jonathan prepared to leave them. He had spent the time teaching Donna and her daughters the basics of mountain survival, how to maintain the fire, how to ration their supplies, how to melt snow for water when the stream froze, and most importantly, how to stay hidden if anyone should somehow find their refuge. There's enough food here to last through the winter if you're careful, he told Donna as he packed his gear. The spring runs year-round, even when it's frozen over. And if you need to hunt, there are snares in that box over there, along with instructions on how to set them. Donna nodded, trying to absorb all the information he was giving her. A week ago, her biggest concern had been whether they had enough flour to bake bread for Sunday dinner. Now she was learning how to trap rabbits and preserve meat. What if you don't come back? Nancy asked, voicing the fear they were all feeling. Jonathan knelt down to the 8-year-old's level. Then you stay here until spring, and when the pass is open, you head north to Canada. There are people there who will help you start over. But we want you to come back, Nancy insisted. Jonathan's expression softened. I want to come back too, little one, and I'll do everything I can to make that happen. He stood and looked at each of them in turn. You're stronger than you know, he told them, echoing the words Donna had spoken during their climb. All of you, don't let anyone tell you different. And then he was gone, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness as silently as he had appeared that first night. Donna stood at the cave entrance, watching until even the sound of his footsteps faded, then sealed the opening behind him and turned to face her daughters. Well, she said, forcing a smile, I guess it's just us girls now. The first weeks alone in the mountain refuge were the hardest. Without Jonathan's reassuring presence, every sound from outside made them freeze with fear. Was it just the wind, or were there footsteps on the rocks above? Was that an animal foraging in the night, or a man trying to find their hiding place? But gradually they settled into a routine. Donna established a schedule that kept them all busy and gave structure to their days. Mornings were for maintenance, checking their supplies, tending the fire, melting snow for water. Afternoons were for education. Donna was determined that her daughters not fall behind in their learning, so she taught them mathematics using their rations. geography using Jonathan's maps of the territory, and history through the stories she remembered from her own schooling. Evenings were for practical skills. Angela learned to mend clothes and prepare meals. Janet became expert at setting and checking the snares that provided them with fresh meat. Even Nancy had her responsibilities, keeping the fire burning and organizing their supplies. I never thought I'd be teaching my daughters to skin rabbits, Donna confided to the empty cave one evening after the girls had gone to sleep. But there was pride in her voice along with the sadness. Her daughters were adapting, learning, growing stronger every day. They complained less than she would have expected, worked harder than she would have demanded, and supported each other with a loyalty that brought tears to her eyes. Angela, in particular, was maturing rapidly under the pressure of their circumstances. At 14, she was becoming a young woman, and Donna could see her own determination and resilience reflected in her eldest daughter's face. "Mama," Angela said one evening as they sat by the fire, "do you think Papa would be proud of us?" The question caught Donna off guard, and for a moment she couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. "I think he'd be amazed by how brave and strong you've all become. I know I am." "Do you miss him?" "Every day, but I think he'd want us to keep going, to not give up hope. That's what he always taught us, wasn't it? That there's always hope as long as we don't give up." Janet looked up from the sock she was darning. "Do you think Mr. Rodriguez will find the bad men?" "I hope so, sweetheart. But even if he doesn't, we'll be all right. We've learned that we can take care of ourselves." And it was true. Over the weeks, Donna had discovered reserves of strength and capability she hadn't known she possessed. She could trap and skin game, preserve meat, treat minor injuries, and keep her family fed and warm in conditions that would have terrified her a few months ago. More importantly, she had learned that her daughters were capable of far more than she had ever imagined. They had faced hardship with courage, adapted to circumstances that would challenge adults, and maintained their essential humanity despite everything they had endured. Winter came early that year, sealing them into their mountain fortress with walls of snow and ice. The passes became impassable, and Donna knew that even if their pursuers had somehow tracked them this far, they would have to wait until spring to make any attempt at capture. The isolation was both a blessing and a curse. They were safe, but they were also completely cut off from the outside world, with no way of knowing what was happening in the valley below or whether Jonathan had made any progress in his investigation. The days grew shorter and the nights longer, and they huddled around their fire, telling stories and playing games to pass the time. Donna taught her daughters songs she remembered from her own childhood, and they created new ones about their adventures in the mountains. "I want to write a book about this someday," Janet announced one snowy evening, "about how we lived up here like pioneers." "What would you call it?" Nancy asked Weston. "The Mountain Family. Or maybe How We Learned to Be Brave." Donna smiled at her middle daughter's literary ambitions. "Those are good titles. Maybe you will write that book someday." "Do you think anyone would want to read it?" "I think people are always interested in stories about ordinary folks doing extraordinary things. And that's what we're doing, isn't it? We're just ordinary people who found out we were stronger than we knew." Christmas came and went with little fanfare, marked only by the sharing of a precious can of peaches and the exchange of small gifts they had made for each other from materials found in the cave. Angela had woven grass baskets for her sisters, Janet had carved wooden figures from pieces of driftwood, and Nancy had drawn pictures on pieces of bark with charcoal from the fire. Donna's gift to her daughters was a promise. "When we get through this, when we're safe again, we'll have the biggest Christmas celebration you can imagine, with a real tree and presents and all the food you can eat." "And cake?" Nancy asked hopefully. "Especially cake. The biggest, most beautiful cake you've ever seen." As winter deepened, their supplies began to run low despite careful rationing. The snares provided some fresh meat, but not enough to sustain 4 people through the long, cold months. Donna found herself making increasingly difficult decisions about food distribution, often giving her own portions to her daughters while claiming she wasn't hungry. Angela noticed, of course, at 14 she was old enough to understand the sacrifices her mother was making. "Mama, you need to eat too," she said one evening when Donna tried to give her an extra portion of stew. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Growing girls need more food than their mothers." "But if you get sick, what happens to us?" It was a sobering question, and one that Donna had been trying not to think about. She was the only adult, the only one with the knowledge and experience to keep them alive. If something happened to her, her daughters would be on their own in the wilderness. "Nothing's going to happen to me," she said firmly. "I promise." But promises were easier to make than to keep. As the weeks wore on, Donna felt her strength ebbing. The constant cold, the poor nutrition, and the stress of their situation were taking their toll. She found herself sleeping more during the day, struggling to maintain the cheerful facade that kept her daughter's spirits up. It was Angela who finally confronted her about it. "Mama, I know you're not well. You're getting thinner and you're tired all the time. Please let us help more. Let us take care of you the way you've been taking care of us." Donna looked at her eldest daughter, seeing not a child anymore, but a young woman who had been forced to grow up too quickly. "You shouldn't have to worry about taking care of me. You should be worried about school and friends and boys." "But I'm not worried about those things. I'm worried about you. We all are." And suddenly, Donna understood something that had been eluding her throughout their ordeal. She had been so focused on protecting her daughters, on being strong for them, that she had forgotten they were capable of being strong for her too. They were a family, and families took care of each other. "All right," she said finally, "we'll share the responsibility. All of us together." From that day forward, the dynamic in their small refuge changed. Angela took over more of the cooking and food preparation. Janet managed their supplies and kept track of their rationing schedule. Even Nancy contributed, tending the fire and keeping their living space organized. And Donna allowed herself to lean on them, to accept their help and their care. It was a difficult adjustment for someone who had always been the caretaker, but she gradually realized that her daughters were thriving under the increased responsibility. "We're becoming quite the team," she observed one evening as they worked together to prepare their meager dinner. "We always were a team," Angela replied. "We just didn't know it yet." Spring came late to the high mountains, but when it finally arrived, it brought with it a sense of renewal and possibility. The snow began to melt, revealing patches of green grass and the first wildflowers. The stream that had been frozen for months began to flow freely again, and they could hear birds singing in the trees outside their refuge. More importantly, the passes were beginning to open, which meant that Jonathan might soon return with news of his investigation. Donna found herself watching the approaches to their cave with increasing frequency, hoping to catch sight of a familiar figure making his way up the treacherous mountain paths. Her daughters shared her anticipation, and conversations increasingly turned to what they would do if Jonathan brought good news. "Do you think we'll be able to go back to our old house?" Nancy asked one morning as they sat outside the cave entrance, enjoying the first warm sunshine they had felt in months. "I don't know, sweetheart. Even if Mr. Rodriguez proves we're innocent, there might not be anything left to go back to." "Then where will we live?" It was a question Donna had been pondering throughout the long winter months. Even if their names were cleared, their old life was gone forever. Mark was dead, their business was surely destroyed, and their reputation in the community might never recover. "Maybe we'll start over somewhere new," she said finally. "Somewhere no one knows our story, where we can build a fresh life." "I'd like that," Janet said unexpectedly. "I'd like to go somewhere where people don't know what happened to us, where we can just be a normal family again." Angela nodded in agreement. "I've been thinking about that too. Maybe we could go to California or Oregon, somewhere with opportunities for women to start businesses or own property." Donna looked at her daughters with surprise. "You've been thinking about starting a business? Why not? You and Papa ran a store. I've learned a lot about managing supplies and keeping accounts just from watching what we've had to do up here. And Janet's good with numbers, and Nancy's good with people." "What kind of business?" "Maybe a boarding house or a restaurant, something that uses the skills we've learned up here. We know how to make a little go a long way, how to cook simple food that tastes good, how to make people feel welcome and safe." The idea was intriguing, and Donna found herself imagining a future where she and her daughters were independent business owners, beholden to no one but themselves. It was a radical concept for women in their society, but their experiences had taught them that they were capable of far more than society expected. "It's something to think about," she said carefully. "But first we need to know what Mr. Rodriguez discovered." As if summoned by her words, A shout echoed across the mountainside. They all froze, listening intently, and then they heard it again. Jonathan's voice, calling their names. Donna's heart leaped with joy and relief. He had returned, and he was alive. Whatever news he brought, at least they would finally know where they stood. They scrambled to remove the camouflage from the cave entrance, and within minutes, Jonathan appeared on the path below, climbing steadily toward them. He looked thinner than when he had left. His clothes were worn and travel-stained, but he was smiling. "Did you miss me?" he called out as he approached. "We thought you might not come back," Nancy said, running to meet him. "I promised I would, didn't I? And I always keep my promises to brave girls." He swept Nancy up in a hug, then embraced each of them in turn. When he came to Donna, she saw something in his eyes that made her heart race with hope. "You found something," she said. "I found everything," he replied. "And you're not going to believe what I discovered." They gathered around the fire inside the cave while Jonathan unpacked his supplies and prepared to tell them what he had learned during his months-long investigation. Donna felt her hands trembling with anticipation and had to clasp them together to keep still. "First, the good news," Jonathan began. "You're innocent of all charges, and I can prove it. The man who visited your store, the one with the scar on his hand, is named Kenneth Martinez. He's a criminal with connections to a gang that's been robbing freight wagons throughout the territory." "So Mark was right not to trust him," Donna said. "More than right. Martinez was scouting for information about shipping schedules so his gang could plan their robberies. When your husband refused to cooperate, Martinez decided to eliminate him as a potential witness." Jonathan pulled out a folder of papers from his pack. "I tracked Martinez to Silver Creek, where he was hiding out after the robbery that killed your husband. He was drunk in a saloon, bragging about how he'd set up the whole thing, how he'd arranged for the blame to fall on your family so no one would investigate too closely. He confessed to anyone who would listen. I found 3 witnesses who heard him admit to planning your husband's murder and framing your family. I also found evidence that he bribed the sheriff to issue the warrant against you." Donna felt tears streaming down her face. After all these months of uncertainty and fear, to finally have proof of their innocence was almost overwhelming. "There's more," Jonathan continued. "The territorial governor has issued a full pardon for you and your daughters, and there's a reward for information leading to Martinez's capture. $5,000. The amount was staggering. $5,000 was enough to start a new life anywhere they wanted, to buy property and establish a business, to ensure that her daughters would never want for anything again." "Where is Martinez now?" Angela asked. Jonathan's expression grew grim. "That's where the story gets complicated. He's dead, killed in a shootout with federal marshals 3 weeks ago. But before he died, he told them about a larger conspiracy, a network of criminals and corrupt officials that reaches all the way to the territorial capital." "What does that mean for us?" "It means you're safe from the original charges, but there might be other people who want to keep you quiet about what you know. Martinez wasn't working alone, and some of his partners are still out there. The revelation that their ordeal was part of a larger criminal conspiracy cast a shadow over what should have been a moment of pure joy. Yes, they were officially innocent, and yes, they would receive compensation for their suffering. But the knowledge that dangerous men might still want them dead was sobering." "So what do we do now?" Donna asked. "You have choices," Jonathan replied. "The federal marshals want you to testify about Martinez's visit to your store to help them build their case against the rest of the gang. If you do that, they'll provide protection and help you relocate anywhere in the country. And if we don't testify, then you take your reward money and disappear. Start over somewhere far away where no one from this territory will ever find you." Donna looked at her daughters, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in their faces. After everything they had been through, the idea of testifying, of making themselves visible again, was terrifying. But she also understood that other families might suffer if the criminals weren't brought to justice. "What do you think we should do?" she asked them. Angela spoke first. "I think we should testify. Papa died because he tried to do the right thing. We should honor that." Janet nodded in agreement. "And maybe if we help catch the bad men, other families won't have to go through what we did." Nancy, young as she was, understood the gravity of the situation. "Will they try to hurt us if we tell on them?" The marshals will protect you, Jonathan assured her, and I'll be there too. I'm not going anywhere. Donna felt a warm rush of gratitude toward this man who had risked everything to help them, who had spent months of his life investigating their case, who was now promising to stand by them through whatever came next. You've already done so much for us, she said. You don't have to. Yes, I do, he interrupted. You and your daughters have become family to me. I lost my own family because I couldn't protect them. I won't make that mistake again. The word family hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that went beyond their shared experiences. Donna realized that somewhere during their months together, first in crisis and then in separation, her feelings for Jonathan had evolved into something deeper than gratitude. And judging by the way he looked at her, the feeling was mutual. So we testify, she said finally. We help the marshals catch the rest of these criminals, and then we figure out what comes next. Together, Angela added, looking meaningfully between her mother and Jonathan. Together, Donna agreed. The trip down from the mountains was very different from their desperate flight up them. This time, they traveled with federal marshals, well-armed and well-supplied, taking their time to ensure everyone's safety. The girls marveled at how different the landscape looked in spring, with wildflowers blooming and streams running full with snowmelt. When they reached the valley floor, Donna was surprised to find that their story had become something of a legend. The tale of the widow and her 3 daughters who had survived a winter in the high mountains had spread throughout the territory, and they were greeted as heroes rather than criminals. The trial of the remaining gang members was swift and decisive. Donna's testimony about Martinez's visit to their store provided a crucial link in the prosecution's case, and all 3 defendants were convicted and sentenced to long prison terms. But more importantly, the trial exposed the corruption that had allowed the gang to operate for so long. The sheriff who had issued the warrant against Donna was arrested, along with 2 territorial officials who had been taking bribes. The governor himself issued a public apology and promised reforms to prevent such injustices in the future. You have helped clean up the whole territory, the lead marshal told Donna after the verdicts were announced. You should be proud. And she was proud, but she was also ready to move on. The past year had taught her that life was too short and too precious to spend dwelling on injustices and might-have-beens. She wanted to focus on the future, on building something positive from the ashes of their old life. The reward money, combined with compensation from the territorial government, gave them the financial freedom to go anywhere and do anything they wanted. After much discussion, they decided on San Francisco, where opportunities for women in business were more plentiful and where they could disappear into a large, diverse population. Jonathan, whose name had also been cleared during the investigation, chose to come with them. California needs good lawmen, he said when Donna asked if he was sure about leaving the territory. And I hear San Francisco is looking for experienced deputies. Is that the only reason you want to come? She asked, though she already knew the answer. You know it's not. His voice was gentle, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. I love you, Donna. I love all of you. If you'll have me, I'd like to be part of your family. Officially. The proposal came not as a grand romantic gesture, but as a quiet conversation between 2 people who had been through hell together and emerged stronger on the other side. They were sitting on the porch of the boarding house where they were staying while waiting for their travel arrangements to be finalized, watching her daughters play in the garden below. They need a father, Donna said, though she knew that wasn't the real reason she wanted to say yes. And I need them, Jonathan replied. All of you. I never thought I'd have a family again, never thought I deserved one after failing to protect my first wife and daughter. But you've shown me that sometimes people get second chances. Are you sure? 3 daughters can be a handful, and they're strong-willed girls who've learned to speak their minds. Jonathan laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. Strong-willed girls who know how to survive in the mountains, trap rabbits, and stand up to injustice? I think I can handle them. And what about me? I'm not the same woman I was when this all started. I've learned that I can take care of myself and my children. I don't need a man to survive. I know you don't need me, Jonathan said seriously. That's part of what I love about you. You're choosing to be with me, not because you have to, but because you want to. That makes all the difference. Donna looked down at her daughters, who were now including some local children in their game. Angela was naturally taking charge, organizing everyone into teams. Janet was keeping score and making sure the rules were followed fairly. Nancy was making friends with the youngest children, her natural warmth drawing them to her. They had all changed during their ordeal. They were stronger, more confident, more capable than they had been before. But they were still her daughters, still the loving, intelligent, spirited girls she had raised. "What do you think they'll say?" she asked. "Why don't we ask them?" So they called the girls over and explained Jonathan's proposal. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Does this mean you'll really be our papa?" Nancy asked, climbing onto Jonathan's lap. "If you want me to be." "We do," Angela said firmly. "We've been a family already, just not officially." "When can we have the wedding?" Janet wanted to know. "How about in San Francisco?" Donna suggested. "We can start our new life with a celebration." And so it was decided they would travel to California as an engaged couple, with Jonathan helping to establish their new business, and Donna and the girls planning a wedding that would mark not just the union of two people, but the official formation of a family that had been forged in hardship and tempered by love. The journey to San Francisco took 2 weeks, traveling by train and stagecoach through some of the most beautiful country any of them had ever seen. The girls pressed their faces to the windows, marveling at the changing landscape, asking endless questions about the places that they passed through. "Look, Mama," Nancy called out as they crossed a particularly spectacular mountain pass. "It's almost as pretty as our mountain." "Our mountain," Donna repeated, realizing that despite everything they had suffered there, the high refuge where they had spent the winter had become a place of positive memories. It was where they had learned they were stronger than they knew, where they had become a true family unit, where they had discovered they could survive anything as long as they had each other. "Will we ever go back there?" Janet asked. "Maybe someday," Jonathan said. "As a family vacation when the girls are older and want to show their own children where their mother and grandmother learned to be brave." The idea of grandchildren, of a future that stretched out beyond just survival, filled Donna with a contentment she hadn't felt since before Mark's death. They had not just survived their ordeal, they had emerged from it with a stronger family, a clearer sense of their own capabilities, and hope for a future that was entirely their own to create. San Francisco in 1887 was a city of opportunity and possibility. The gold rush was long over, but the spirit of adventure and entrepreneurship that it had fostered remained. Women owned businesses, managed properties, and participated in civic life in ways that would have been unthinkable in the small mountain town they had fled. Within a month of their arrival, Donna had purchased a small hotel near the waterfront with the intention of converting it into a boarding house that catered to families and respectable working women. Angela threw herself into the renovation project, displaying a natural talent for organization and design. Janet took charge of the books and the business planning, her mathematical skills proving invaluable. Even Nancy found her role, charming potential guests and making everyone feel welcome. Jonathan found work as a deputy sheriff, his experience and reputation earning him respect from his new colleagues. But more than that, he found his place in their family, providing the steady masculine presence that had been missing since Mark's death, while never trying to replace the girl's father in their hearts. The wedding took place on a bright October morning, exactly 1 year after they had first met Jonathan on that desperate night in the mountains. Donna wore a simple blue dress that Angela had helped her choose, and her daughters served as her bridesmaids, dressed in matching yellow gowns that made them look like sunflowers. The ceremony was small but meaningful, attended by the few friends they had made in their new city and presided over by a minister who had been moved by their story. When Jonathan slipped the ring onto Donna's finger, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, the hardships that had tested them, and the love that had sustained them. "Do you take this man to be your husband?" the minister asked. "To have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse?" "I do," Donna replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. When the ceremony was over and they were officially husband and wife, Jonathan gathered all 4 of his new family members in his arms. "I have 3 daughters, no sons," Donna had told him that first night, as if it were a confession of failure. "Good," he had replied with a grin. that she now knew mass depths of pain and hope. I need strong girls. And strong they were. Angela was already talking about expanding their boarding house business, perhaps opening a second location. Janet was keeping meticulous records and had identified several ways to increase their profits. Nancy was learning to read and write with the intensity of someone who understood that education was the key to independence. They were no longer the desperate fugitives who had fled into the mountains a year ago. They were business owners, citizens of a growing city, a family that had chosen each other and been chosen in return. The boarding house prospered under their management. Word spread about the clean rooms, good food, and welcoming atmosphere provided by the Taylor Rodriguez family, and they soon had a waiting list of potential guests. Donna found herself becoming something of a mentor to other women who were trying to establish themselves in business, sharing the lessons she had learned about perseverance and self-reliance. You know, she told Jonathan one evening as they sat on the porch of their boarding house, watching their daughters play with the neighborhood children. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful for what happened to us. Grateful. Not for Mark's death or for the fear and hardship we endured, but grateful for what we learned about ourselves, about what we're capable of. If none of that had happened, we might have lived our whole lives never knowing how strong we really are. Jonathan took her hand, his thumb tracing the gold band on her finger. And I might never have found you. Do you think Mark would approve? She asked, a question that had been weighing on her mind as their first wedding anniversary approached. I think Mark would want you to be happy, and I think he'd be proud of the women his daughters have become. It was true. Angela, now 16, was already being courted by several young men, but she had made it clear that she intended to establish herself in business before considering marriage. Janet, at 14, was showing signs of becoming a formidable entrepreneur, with plans to attend college and study business administration. Nancy, now 10, was the heart of their family operation, with an intuitive understanding of what made people feel comfortable and welcome. They were strong girls indeed, shaped by hardship but not broken by it, confident in their abilities and secure in their family's love. As winter approached, bringing with it memories of their time in the mountain refuge, Donna found herself thinking often about the woman she had been before their ordeal began. That woman had been dependent on her husband for financial security, had never imagined she could run a business or support her family on her own. She had been a good woman, a loving mother, but she had lived within the narrow confines of what society expected from women of her class and time. The woman she had become was different. She was still loving, still devoted to her family, but she was also independent, capable, and unafraid to take risks. She had learned that she could protect her children, provide for them, and build a future for them with her own hands and her own mind. I've been thinking, she told Jonathan one evening as they went over the books for the boarding house, about writing down our story, not for publication, but for the girls so they'll always remember what we went through and what we learned. That's a good idea. What would you call it? Donna smiled, remembering Janet's childhood ambition to write a book about their adventures. How We Learned to Be Brave. The memoir took Donna 6 months to complete, written in the evenings after the boarding house guests had been settled and the day's business concluded. She wrote about their desperate flight from Cedar Ridge, their terrifying first encounter with Jonathan, the long winter in the mountain refuge, and their eventual vindication and new life in San Francisco. But more than just recounting events, she tried to capture the emotional journey they had all undergone, the transformation from victims to survivors to thrivers. She wrote about the moment she realized her daughters were stronger than she had ever imagined, about learning to accept help while maintaining her independence, about finding love again when she thought that part of her life was over. When she finished, she read portions of it aloud to her family and was gratified to see tears in Jonathan's eyes and pride in her daughters' faces. You should publish this, Mama, Angela said. Other women need to read it, need to know that they can survive anything. Do you really think so? I know so. There are women all over the country facing hardships, wondering if they're strong enough to protect their families and build new lives. Your story could give them hope. And so, somewhat to her own surprise, Donna found herself in negotiations with a publisher who specialized in women's stories. How We Learned to Be Brave, A Family's Journey from Tragedy to Triumph, was published in the spring of 1889, 2 years after their arrival in San Francisco. The book was a modest success, selling particularly well among women's groups and in territories where families were still struggling to establish themselves. Donna received letters from readers across the country thanking her for showing them that ordinary women could accomplish extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. One letter in particular moved her deeply. It was from a widow in Colorado who had been left with 4 young children in a failing ranch after her husband's death in a mining accident. "Your story gave me the courage to keep fighting," the woman wrote. "I was ready to give up, to sell the ranch and move back east to live with relatives who didn't want us. But after reading about what you and your daughters accomplished, I decided to try one more season. I'm writing to tell you that we not only saved the ranch, but we're expanding it. My oldest daughter has turned out to be a natural with cattle, and my son has a gift for finding water. We're going to make it, and it's partly because you showed us that families can be stronger than they know." Letters like that made Donna understand that their story had value beyond their own family's experience. They had become symbols of resilience and in hope, proof that people could overcome seemingly impossible circumstances and emerge stronger on the other side. The success of the book also brought unexpected opportunities. Donna was invited to speak at women's clubs and church groups, sharing her story and encouraging other women to believe in their own capabilities. She discovered that she had a talent for public speaking, and her talks were always well received. "You're becoming famous," Jonathan teased her after a particularly successful speaking engagement. "I'm becoming useful," she corrected. "There's a difference." But fame, or at least regional recognition, did come with their success. The boarding house was featured in newspaper articles about successful women-owned businesses. Angela was interviewed for a piece about young women who were choosing careers over early marriage. Janet's mathematical abilities earned her a scholarship to attend the University of California, making her one of the first women in their family to pursue higher education. Even Nancy found herself in the spotlight when a photographer for a national magazine took pictures of their family for an article about Western pioneers. At 12, she was already showing signs of the beauty and intelligence that ran in their family. But more importantly, she had the confidence and poise of someone who had never doubted her own worth. "Look at us," Donna said one evening as they sat around the dinner table in their private quarters above the boarding house. "We've become quite the accomplished family." "We always were accomplished," Angela pointed out. "We just didn't know it yet." It was a wise observation from a young woman who had grown into someone Donna barely recognized as the frightened 14-year-old who had huddled in a mountain cave 2 years earlier. Angela was now 18, beautiful and poised, with suitors calling regularly despite her stated intention to establish herself in business before considering marriage. Janet, at 16, was preparing for her first year at university, where she planned to study business and economics with the goal of eventually expanding their boarding house operation into a chain of family-friendly hotels. Her mathematical mind had developed into a keen understanding of finance and investment that impressed even the bank managers who handled their accounts. Nancy, now 12, was the social butterfly of the family, popular with guests and neighbors alike, but also showing signs of inheriting her mother's business acumen and her sister's determination to make her own way in the world. And Jonathan had seamlessly integrated himself into their family dynamic, providing stability and support without ever trying to dominate or control. He had been promoted to chief deputy, earning respect throughout the city for his fairness and competence. But his greatest pride was clearly in his adopted daughters and the woman who had become his wife. "I have something to tell you all," Donna announced as they finished their meal. "I've been offered an opportunity to write a second book." The response was immediate and enthusiastic. "What about?" Angela asked. "About women in business. The publisher wants me to interview successful businesswomen across the West and write about their experiences and strategies." "That sounds perfect for you," Jonathan said. "You have already been doing that informally with the women who come to your speaking engagements. It would mean traveling, though, spending weeks or even months away from home." "We can manage the boarding house," Janet said confidently. "Angela and I know the business as well as you do, and Nancy's old enough to help with the guests. And I'll be here to handle any problems that come up," Jonathan added. Donna looked around the table at her family, these strong, capable people who had emerged from tragedy and hardship to build something beautiful together. 2 years ago, she had been a desperate widow fleeing into the mountains with 3 terrified daughters. Now she was a successful businesswoman, published author, and sought-after speaker, married to a man who respected her independence and supported her ambitions. More importantly, her daughters had grown into young women who understood their own worth and capabilities, who expected to make their own way in the world and contribute to their family's success. "I think I'll accept the offer," she said finally. "It's time for the next chapter of our story." The second book, Daughters of the West, Women Building America's Future, was published in 1891 and became Donna's most successful work. It featured interviews with dozens of women across the Western territories who had built businesses, managed ranches, practiced medicine, taught school, and generally defied the conventional expectations of their gender. The book tour that followed took Donna to cities and towns across the country, where she spoke to enthusiastic audiences about the capabilities of women and the importance of economic independence. She met women who had been inspired by her first book to start their own businesses, others who had left abusive marriages and built new lives for themselves, and countless mothers who were raising their daughters to believe they could accomplish anything. But perhaps the most meaningful part of her travels was a return visit to the mountain refuge where she and her daughters had spent that long winter. Jonathan had suggested the trip as a way to complete the circle of their journey, and the girls had eagerly agreed. The climb was much easier this time, with proper equipment and supplies, and no desperate urgency driving them upward. When they reached the cave that had sheltered them during their darkest hours, they found it much as they had left it, still stocked with supplies for the next travelers who might need refuge. "It seems smaller than I remembered," Nancy observed, looking around the space that had once seemed so vast and secure. "We were smaller then too," Angela replied. "In more ways than one." They spent the night in the cave, sharing stories and memories, marveling at how much their lives had changed since their last visit. Donna pulled out the journal she had started during their winter exile, reading passages that captured their fear and uncertainty, their growing strength and determination. "Listen to this," she said, finding an entry from their darkest period. "I don't know if we'll survive this winter, but I'm proud of how brave my daughters have been. They complain less than I do, work harder than I ask them to, and support each other with a loyalty that amazes me. Whatever happens, they've shown me what it means to be truly strong." "You wrote that about us?" Janet asked, her voice soft with emotion. "I wrote that about all of us. We were all learning to be brave together." Jonathan, who had been quietly tending the fire, looked up at his family. "You know what I remember most about that first night I found you? It wasn't how scared you were, though you had every right to be. It was how you were still protecting each other, still putting your daughter's needs before your own. I knew then that you were going to make it, whatever it took." "And what about now?" Donna asked. "Do you think we've made it?" Jonathan smiled, the same grin that had reassured her on that desperate night years ago. "I think you've done more than survive. I think you've shown the whole country what it means to be strong." As they prepared to leave the mountain the next morning, Donna took one last look around the cave that had been their refuge and their school. Here, she had learned that she was capable of far more than she had ever imagined. Here, her daughters had discovered their own strength and resilience. Here, they had become a family in the truest sense of the word. She left behind a note for future travelers, tucked into the supply box where others would find it. "To whoever reads this, you are stronger than you know. You can survive whatever brought you here, and you can build a new life on the other side of your troubles. Have faith in yourself and in the people you love. We did, and it made all the difference." The return journey to San Francisco was a celebration, a victory lap for a family that had faced the worst and emerged triumphant. They stopped at the town where their ordeal had begun, now under new leadership after the corruption trials that had followed their testimony. The people who recognized them treated them as heroes, and several women approached Donna to thank her for her books and her example. "You showed us that we don't have to accept whatever life hands us," one woman told her. "We can fight back. We can build something better." It was exactly the message Donna had hoped to convey, and hearing it from the lips of women who had been inspired to change their own lives was deeply gratifying. Back in San Francisco, they found their boarding house thriving under the management team they had left in charge. Angela had been accepted to a business college, where she planned to study hotel management. Janet was excelling in her university courses and had been offered an internship with a prominent investment firm. Nancy was top of her class and had started a small business of her own, making and selling decorated stationery to the guests at their boarding house. Look at what you've all accomplished, Donna marveled as they gathered for their first family dinner after her return. Look at what we've all accomplished, Angela corrected. We're a team, remember? And they were. They had started as a desperate mother and her three daughters, fleeing into the wilderness with nothing but their love for each other. They had become a family of strong, independent women who supported each other's dreams while building something meaningful together. Jonathan had been right that first night when he had said he needed strong girls. But what he hadn't known then, what none of them had known, was that they needed each other just as much. They had found in their shared struggles not just survival, but purpose, not just safety, but fulfillment. As Donna looked around the table at her family, she realized that their story wasn't really about overcoming tragedy, though they had certainly done that. It was about discovering who they really were when everything familiar was stripped away, about learning that strength and love and determination could overcome any obstacle. I have three daughters, no sons, she had confessed to Jonathan that first night, as if it were a weakness. Now she knew it was their greatest strength. Her daughters were the future, carriers of the lessons they had learned together, examples to other young women that they could be anything they chose to be. They were proof that families could be stronger than the sum of their parts, that love could triumph over fear, and that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they refused to give up. The mountain man had grinned and said he needed strong girls. What he had found was a family of women who would change not just their own lives, but the lives of countless others who would read their story and find in it the courage to write their own tales of triumph. And that, Donna thought as she watched her daughters plan their futures with confidence and joy, was the greatest victory of all.